Billionaire sees a child drawing his face in the sand, then hears her call him Grandpa. Victor Russo adjusted his Panama hat, shielding his eyes from the glare of the Florida sun. The turquoise water of the Gulf of Mexico lapped gently at the pristine white sand, a scene of postcard-perfect beauty. But Victor, for all his surroundings, felt a familiar pang of loneliness. He was a billionaire, a titan of the real estate industry, a man who could buy anything he desired. Yet the one thing he truly craved, connection, family, remained elusive. He walked along the beach, a daily ritual he'd adopted since moving to a sprawling beachfront estate in Naples. The rhythmic sound of the waves, the cries of the gulls, the soft crunch of sand beneath his feet, it was a soothing balm to his restless spirit. But it couldn't fill the void, the aching emptiness left by the estrangement from his only son, Michael. 10 years. 10 years since their last, bitter argument. 10 years since Michael had walked out of his life, vowing never to return. Victor had tried, in his own way, to reach out, to mend the rift. But his efforts had been clumsy, half-hearted, hampered by his own pride and his inability to express his emotions. He'd built his empire on ruthless ambition, on a relentless drive to succeed. He'd amassed a fortune that placed him among the wealthiest men in the world. But his success had come at a cost. He'd neglected his personal life, his relationships, sacrificing everything on the altar of his ambition. His wife, Eleanor, had died of cancer 5 years earlier, leaving him even more isolated. He'd loved Eleanor, in his own way, but their marriage had been more of a partnership, a comfortable arrangement, than a passionate romance. Michael had been their only child, the focus of their hopes and dreams. And now, Michael was gone. Victor had no idea where he was, what he was doing, or even if he was still alive. The thought gnawed at him, a constant source of guilt and regret. He'd often wondered if Michael had found happiness, if he'd married, had children. The idea of having grandchildren, of carrying on a Russo name, was a bittersweet fantasy. He stopped walking, gazing out at the endless expanse of the ocean. He was 72 years old, his health still robust, but he knew his time was limited. He'd built an empire, but what was it all for? Who would inherit his legacy? Who would remember him when he was gone? He sighed, a deep, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his regrets. He turned to continue his walk, his gaze falling on a small figure a short distance ahead. A little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, was kneeling in the sand, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was using a small stick to draw something, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth. Victor, drawn by a flicker of curiosity, walked towards her. He rarely interacted with children, finding them noisy and unpredictable. But there was something about this little girl, about her focused intensity, that intrigued him. As he got closer, he saw what she was drawing. It was a face. A man's face, crudely drawn, but with a surprising degree of detail. And the face looked familiar. He stopped a few feet away, a strange feeling stirring within him. He cleared his throat, his voice a little hoarse. "Hello there," he said gently. "What are you drawing?" The little girl looked up, her eyes wide and blue, her face framed by a tangle of blonde curls. She didn't seem startled by his presence, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I'm drawing my grandpa," she said, her voice clear and sweet. Victor's heart skipped a beat. His grandpa? He felt a sudden rush of dizziness, a wave of emotions he couldn't quite comprehend. He knelt down beside her, his gaze fixed on the drawing in the sand. It was a crude representation, but the resemblance was unmistakable. It was his face, the strong jawline, the prominent nose, the deep-set eyes. Even the slight furrow in his brow, a permanent fixture from years of stress and worry. "Oh, who did you say you were drawing?" he asked again, his voice trembling slightly. The little girl pointed at the drawing with her stick. "My grandpa," she repeated. "Mommy says he's the richest man in the world." The richest man in the world. The words echoed in Victor's mind, a mocking reminder of his empty success. He stared at the little girl, at her innocent face, her bright blue eyes, her confident declaration. Your grandpa? He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. What's your name? Chloe, the little girl replied, smiling. Chloe Miller. Miller. The name didn't register. He didn't know any Millers. But the drawing was undeniable. It was him. And where's your mommy, Chloe? He asked, his heart pounding in his chest. Chloe pointed towards a small, weathered beach hut a short distance away. It was a simple structure, barely more than a shack, a stark contrast to the opulent mansions that lined the beach. Mommy's inside, she said. She's making lunch. Victor stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He felt a mixture of disbelief, hope, and a growing sense of dread. He had to know. He had to see this woman, this mommy, who had told her daughter that her grandfather was the richest man in the world. He walked towards the hut, Chloe skipping alongside him, her hand reaching for his. He took her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. He felt a strange connection to this little girl, a warmth that spread through him, chasing away the chill of his loneliness. The hut was small, but clean and tidy. The door was open, and Victor could hear the sounds of someone moving inside. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever he was about to face. Mommy, Chloe called out, running into the hut. I found my grandpa. Victor followed her inside, his heart pounding in his chest. He stepped into the dim interior, his eyes adjusting to the shadows. A woman stood by a small stove, her back to him. She was slender, with long, dark hair tied back in a ponytail. She turned around, and Victor's breath caught in his throat. He knew her. He recognized her instantly, even after all these years. It was Lisa Collins, Michael's ex-girlfriend. Lisa stared at him, her eyes widening in shock. Her face, once youthful and vibrant, was now etched with lines of weariness, of hardship. But her beauty was still evident, her features refined, her gaze intelligent and unwavering. Victor, she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you doing here? Victor couldn't speak. He simply stared at her, his mind reeling. Lisa. Michael's Lisa, the mother of his granddaughter? Chloe, oblivious to the tension in the air, tugged on Lisa's hand. Mommy, this is my grandpa, she said proudly. The one I drew in the sand. Lisa looked down at Chloe, her expression a mixture of love and pain. She knelt down, her hands on Chloe's shoulders. Chloe, honey, she said softly, why don't you go outside and play for a little while? Mommy needs to talk to Mr. Russo. Chloe hesitated, her eyes flickering between her mother and Victor. Then she nodded, understanding dawning in her gaze. She ran out of the hut, leaving Victor and Lisa alone, facing each other across a chasm of years and unspoken words. Lisa stood up, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked at Victor, her eyes searching, questioning. Ow, how did you find us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor gestured towards the door, towards Chloe. She was drawing my face in the sand, he said, his voice hoarse. She said I was her grandpa. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, a wave of emotion washing over her face. When she opened them, they were filled with tears. Yes, she said softly. She's your granddaughter. Victor felt a lump forming in his throat. He couldn't speak. He simply stared at Lisa, at the woman who had carried his son's child, the woman who had kept this secret from him for so long. Michael, he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. What happened to him? Lisa's tears began to flow freely. She turned away, her shoulders shaking with sobs. He's gone, Victor, she said, her voice choked with grief. He died 5 years ago. He had a rare form of leukemia. It was very quick. Victor felt a crushing weight on his chest. Michael, his son, dead. He'd never known. He'd never had the chance to say goodbye, to make amends, to tell him he loved him. He sank onto a small, rickety chair, his legs unable to support him. He felt numb, overwhelmed by a wave of grief and regret. Lisa turned back to him, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, Victor, she said. I should have told you. I should have contacted you. But after everything that happened, I didn't know how. She explained that after Michael had left, she discovered she was pregnant. She tried to reach him, but he'd changed his number, disappeared. She'd been alone, scared, with no support. She considered contacting Victor, but she'd been afraid. Afraid of his reaction, afraid of his judgment, afraid of his power. She'd known about his estrangement from Michael, about their bitter argument. She'd feared he would reject her child. So, she'd kept the secret. She'd raised Chloe on her own, working multiple jobs, struggling to make ends meet. She'd told Chloe stories about her father, about his kindness, his intelligence, his love of adventure. She told her that her grandfather was a very important man, a very rich man. I didn't want her to grow up thinking she was unwanted, Lisa said, her voice breaking. I wanted her to have something to be proud of. Victor looked at Lisa, at her tired face, her weary eyes. He saw the strength, the resilience, the unwavering love she had for her daughter. He saw the sacrifices she'd made, the hardships she'd endured. He felt a surge of shame, of guilt for his own blindness, his own selfishness. He'd been so consumed by his own grief, his own regrets, that he'd never considered the possibility that Michael might have left behind a legacy, a child, a family. He stood up, his legs shaky but determined. He walked towards Lisa, his arms outstretched. "Lisa," he said, his voice choked with emotion, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. For everything. For Michael, for you, for Chloe." He reached out and gently touched her arm. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. I want to be a part of her life, Lisa," he said, his voice firm. "I want to be a grandfather to Chloe. I want to help you." Lisa's tears flowed freely again, but this time they were tears of relief, of release. She nodded, her head bobbing slightly. "Thank you, Victor," she whispered. "Thank you." He pulled her into a hug, a tentative embrace that held the weight of years of loss, of regret, of unspoken emotions. He held her close, feeling the warmth of her body, the fragility of her frame. And in that moment, standing in the small, humble beach hut, surrounded by the echoes of the past and the promise of the future, Victor Russo, the billionaire real estate mogul, finally felt like he had found something worth more than all the money in the world. He'd found his family. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions, of revelations, of tentative steps towards building a new reality. Victor spent hours with Lisa and Chloe, listening to their stories, learning about their lives, trying to piece together the missing years. He learned that Michael had struggled after leaving home. He'd drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing. He'd battled depression, a darkness that had always lurked beneath his charming exterior. Lisa had been his anchor, his source of strength and stability. They'd met in college, a brief but intense romance that had left a lasting impact on both of them. When Michael had left, she'd been devastated, heartbroken, but she'd resolved to create a good life for their child. She'd worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs, sacrificing her own dreams to provide for Chloe. She'd moved to the small beach town, seeking a simpler, quieter life, away from the pressures and expectations of the city. Victor listened, his heart aching with each new detail. He saw the toll that the years had taken on Lisa, the lines of worry etched on her face, the weariness in her eyes. He saw the resilience, the strength, the unwavering love she had for her daughter. He also learned more about his son, about the man Michael had become. Lisa shared stories, anecdotes, memories that painted a picture of a complex, troubled, but ultimately kind and loving person. "He was so talented, Victor," Lisa said, her voice filled with a bittersweet nostalgia. "He could draw, he could write, he could play the guitar. He had so much potential." She showed Victor a box filled with Michael's belongings, sketches, poems, photographs, a worn-out guitar. Victor examined each item carefully, his hands trembling. He saw glimpses of the son he'd lost, the son he'd never truly known. He found a sketchbook filled with drawings, portraits of Lisa, landscapes, abstract designs. He saw a raw talent, a sensitivity, a depth of emotion that he'd never recognized in his son. He found a journal filled with poems, dark and brooding, but also lyrical and beautiful. He read about Michael's struggles with depression, his feelings of inadequacy, his longing for connection. He found photographs of Michael and Lisa, young and carefree, their faces filled with laughter and love. He saw a happiness, a lightness, that he'd rarely witnessed in his son. And he found a photograph of Michael holding a baby, a tiny infant wrapped in a blanket. It was Chloe. Michael's eyes were filled with a tenderness, a pride, a love that brought tears to Victor's eyes. He realized, with a pang of regret, that he'd missed out on so much. He'd missed out on seeing his son become a father, on witnessing the joy, the love, the transformative power of parenthood. He also began to understand the reasons for their estrangement, the roots of their conflict. He'd been a demanding, controlling father, always pushing Michael to follow in his footsteps, to pursue a career in business, to live up to his expectations. He'd never understood Michael's artistic temperament, his sensitivity, his need for independence. He dismissed his dreams as frivolous, his passions as impractical. He'd been too focused on his own ambition, on building his empire, to see the damage he was doing to his relationship with his son. He'd driven him away, alienated him, with his relentless pressure and his inability to accept him for who he was. "I was a terrible father, Lisa," Victor confessed, his voice filled with shame. "I was too hard on him, too demanding. I never told him I was proud of him." Lisa looked at him, her eyes filled with compassion. "He knew you loved him, Victor," she said, "in your own way. He needed you to show it differently." She told him about the last time she'd seen Michael, a few months before his death. He'd been weak, frail, but his spirit was still strong. He'd talked about his father, about his regrets, about his longing for reconciliation. "He wanted to reach out to you, Victor," Lisa said. "He wanted to make amends. But he was afraid. He didn't think you'd forgive him." Victor closed his eyes, a wave of grief washing over him. He'd been so close to bridging the gap, to healing the rift. But he'd waited too long. He'd let his pride, his stubbornness get in the way. Now it was too late. Michael was gone, but he had a second chance, a chance to make amends through Lisa and Chloe. He wouldn't waste it. The initial awkwardness between Victor and Lisa gradually dissipated, replaced by a shared sense of purpose, a mutual desire to build a future for Chloe. They spent hours talking, sharing memories of Michael, piecing together the fragments of their intertwined lives. Victor learned about Chloe's love of art, her fascination with the ocean, her bright, inquisitive mind. He saw glimpses of Michael in her smile, in her gestures, in her artistic talent. He took her to the beach, teaching her how to build sandcastles, how to identify seashells, how to appreciate the beauty of the natural world. He read her stories, played games with her, answered her endless questions with patience and humor. He discovered the simple joys of being a grandfather, the unconditional love, the unbridled enthusiasm, the infectious laughter of a child. He felt a warmth, a connection he hadn't experienced in years. He also made an effort to connect with Lisa, not just as Chloe's mother, but as a person, as a woman he'd come to respect and admire. He apologized for his past behavior, for his role in the estrangement from Michael, for the pain he'd caused her. "I was so focused on my own ambitions," he confessed, "that I didn't see what was truly important. I didn't see the damage I was doing to my son, to you. I'm so sorry, Lisa." Lisa listened, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She'd carried her own burden of resentment, of anger towards Victor, but she also recognized his genuine remorse, his sincere desire to make amends. "Understand, Victor," she said. You were a different person back then. We all make mistakes. We all have regrets." She told him about her struggles, about the challenges of raising a child alone, about the financial hardships she'd faced. She'd worked tirelessly, sacrificing her own needs to provide for Chloe. Victor listened, his heart aching for the difficulties she'd endured. He realized the extent of his mother's interference, the depth of the pain she'd caused. "I want to help you, Lisa," he said. "I want to make things right. I want to provide for Chloe, for both of you. I want to give you the security, the opportunities you deserve." Lisa hesitated, her pride warring with her practical needs. She'd always been independent, self-reliant. She didn't want to be beholden to anyone, especially not to Victor Russo. "I don't want her charity, Victor," she said. "I've managed on my own for all these years. I could take care of Chloe." Victor shook his head. "It's not charity, Lisa," he said. "It's family. It's what Michael would have wanted. It's what I need to do." He explained that he wanted to set up a trust fund for Chloe to ensure her education, her future. He wanted to help Lisa buy a house, a real home, instead of the small, rented beach hut. He wanted to provide them with the resources, the stability they'd been denied. He also wanted to be a part of their lives, not just as a benefactor, but as a grandfather, as a friend, as a family member. He wanted to build a relationship with Chloe, to share his life with her, to watch her grow. Lisa, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine love he had for Chloe, finally relented. She agreed to accept his help, not for herself, but for her daughter. "Thank you, Victor," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "For Chloe, for everything." The legal and financial arrangements were complex, but Victor's team of lawyers and advisors handled them efficiently. He established a trust fund for Chloe, ensuring her financial security for life. He helped Lisa find a beautiful, comfortable house near the beach, a place where Chloe could grow and thrive. But more important than the material support was the emotional connection, the growing bond between Victor, Lisa, and Chloe. They spent time together, sharing meals, going on outings, creating new memories. Victor discovered the joys of simple pleasures, of building sandcastles, of reading bedtime stories, of watching a little girl's face light up with wonder. He discovered a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging he'd never known before. He also saw a change in Lisa. The weariness in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a spark of hope, a renewed sense of optimism. She started to pursue her own dreams, taking art classes, exploring her creative talents. Victor encouraged her, supported her, providing her with the resources and the encouragement she needed. He saw her blossom, not just as a mother, but as an individual, as a woman with her own passions and aspirations. They were building a family, an unconventional family, forged from loss and regret, but held together by love, by forgiveness, by a shared commitment to the future. Years passed, and the bonds between Victor, Lisa, and Chloe grew stronger. Chloe blossomed into a bright, talented, and compassionate young woman. She excelled in school, pursued her love of art, and developed a deep connection with her grandfather. Victor watched her grow with pride, with a sense of wonder, with a bittersweet awareness of the years he'd missed. He made up for lost time, attending her school plays, her art exhibitions, her sporting events. He was her biggest fan, her constant supporter, her loving grandfather. Lisa, too, flourished. She became a successful artist. Her paintings exhibited in galleries, her work praised for its emotional depth and its unique perspective. She found fulfillment in her art, in her motherhood, in her newfound friendship with Victor. They never became romantically involved, but they developed a deep, enduring bond, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared history, and a profound love for Chloe. They were a family in every sense of the word. Victor, in his later years, reflected on his life, on his successes and his failures, on the lessons he'd learned. He realized that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in relationships, in love, in the legacy you left behind. He'd built a financial empire, but his greatest achievement, his most enduring legacy, was the family he'd found, the bonds he'd forged with Lisa and Chloe. He often thought about Michael, about the son he'd lost, the son he'd never truly known. He felt a pang of regret, a lingering sadness, but he also felt a sense of peace. He knew that Michael's spirit lived on in Chloe, in her kindness, her creativity, her love of life. He decided to use his wealth to create a lasting tribute to Michael, to honor his memory, and to support causes that were important to him. He established a foundation in Michael's name, dedicated to supporting young artists, to funding research into leukemia, to providing resources for families struggling with loss and grief. He wanted to turn his personal tragedy into something positive, to make a difference in the world, to leave a legacy of love and compassion. One day, Victor, Lisa, and Chloe were walking on the beach, the same beach where he'd first encountered Chloe drawing his face in the sand. Chloe, now a teenager, was tall and graceful, her blonde hair shimmering in the sunlight. They stopped at the spot where their journey had begun, the memories of that day still vivid in their minds. "Do you remember, Grandpa," Chloe said, smiling, "when I drew your picture in the sand? I didn't even know who you were." Victor chuckled, his heart filled with warmth. "I remember," he said. "It was the best day of my life." He looked at Lisa, her face etched with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you, Lisa," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "for giving me this gift, for giving me my family." Lisa smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you, Victor," she said, "for being the father Michael never had the chance to be, for being the grandfather Chloe needed." They stood there for a moment, the three of them, bound together by love, by loss, by a shared history. The waves crashed gently on the shore. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant colors. Victor knew that his time was limited. He'd lived a long, full life, a life filled with both triumph and tragedy. But he had no regrets. He'd found his family. He'd found his purpose. He'd found his peace. He looked at Chloe, his beloved granddaughter, the living embodiment of his son's legacy. He saw a future filled with hope, with promise, with the enduring power of love. He knew that his legacy would live on, not in buildings or bank accounts, but in the hearts of those he loved, in the lives he'd touched, in the family he'd found. He had created a legacy of love, and that, he realized, was the greatest wealth of all. He looked at his granddaughter and held her tight and as close as he possibly could, thanking God for this unexpected blessing in his life.